Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, as usual, is the real Dr. Beat from the Great Midwest. Tonight, we're talking about one of the greatest crime thriller movies of all time, starring Gene Hackman, one of the greatest actors of all time, with one of the greatest car chases of all time, and starring Roy Scheider, who I didn't like, but now I like a lot. This is a great movie, The French Connection from 1971, I believe. It's just straight up crime thriller. There's really nothing more to it other than drugs getting smuggled in from Marseille, France, for the cultured people, and it's what's happening in a dirty, gritty, gutty, ugly early 1970s New York City too. So, a doctor, I got to sit there and say that Gene Hackman is somebody that we've talked about a little bit here on the Extreme Movie Show. But we've never really done a lot of movies where he's the starring vehicle, and obviously Gene Hackman's been involved in a lot of things over the years as a main star, as a co-star, as a supporting actor. The guy's phenomenal. He's great. And I think this movie begins and ends with Gene Hackman too. So I wanted to get your initial take on this movie with Gene Hackman specifically.
Well, I didn't care too much for his character in this movie. He seemed more like a dick. And we discussed before that Roy Schneider is usually the guy who plays the dicks.
Yes.
And Roy Schneider was the nice guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to slap him because he's wearing the stupid hat, the Yogi Bear hat.
You mean Popeye?
Popeye. And what was that? Ripping up the name Popeye. It's my take of this movie. It's a thriller. It's a crime thriller. Yes, it's about the French, as they call him, the Frog. Frog 1, Frog 2 come to America, and they want to make, they want to start selling coke. So they use this guy who's a big TV star in France as a cover. They bring his car over, and in his car, as soon as anytime there's a car being shipped in and there's like a drug deal going on, like the car is going to be involved. Either you're smuggling or it's something else is going to happen, but
right.
So this is a very simplistic movie. I felt that it was really slow throughout the beginning until you got to the foot chase scenes. Mm-hmm. It kind of felt, I felt like Nighthawks. It was a little more faster pace in this, and that's a slow burner too.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that because you're right about this pace. It's very deliberate, and I think the only minus for it is that it's not like what we'd recently covered here on the Extreme Movie Show, Rocky, where we talked about how Rocky had a very long first act where we got to be emotionally invested in either the main character or several characters, depending on what your preference is. Here, it's just straight in. We're watching a couple guys, a buddy cop, if you want to call it that, for lack of a better term, and they're busy working, and there's no real secret tricks of the trade. There's no real whatever, and that's one of the.
They're just shaking down guys left and right, and it's like and those guys don't really have anything to do with it.
Well, and that's one thing I wanted to bring up here too. So this movie came out 50 years ago, and Gene Hackman, who I think celebrated his 92nd birthday yesterday or the day before that, the 30th, I think. Yeah, I mean, he's still around. Like you see, he's been around on a lot of things. He's pretty much retired from doing anything, to my knowledge. The early 70s, we've commented on this before, reviewing the Dirty Harry series and a few other things too. We started talking about how in the late 60s to early 70s, we started seeing not the lovey-dovey hippie movement so much as we started seeing the big cities in shambles, because they really were, and some may argue still are today, or even worse. But we talked about how this is a movement that we definitely saw on screen, and we've talked about how some movies like Rocky are uplifting, which a lot of people didn't like in the 70s in terms of popularity. A lot of people liked cynical films, ones that are really hardcore. And this one is, but you're right about Popeye and his character. He's hardcore. He's good. He's competent.
Drops a hard N-word.
But here's the word I want to say here. And, I joke about this with T.J. Hooker in the 80s because it's a goose show, but even T.J. Hooker had some of this. Very militant, because black cinema was really coming into its own in the 70s, whether you think black exploitation type movies are legit or not. Black people appearing in cinema doing their own thing. There's definitely a little bit of the vibe in here because they shake down a couple places. There's some less than nice language in here these guys have that I was like, oh, I forgot that they said this or that term. And it's like, wow, you're not that. No wonder I had a tough time finding it streaming. But it's just they're so militant. You're right. They go in there and they bust up people just minding their own business because they know they're the dregs of society, and in their mind, it doesn't matter if they're not doing anything illegal. Damn it, they're going to know something, and we're going to get it out of you by being that militant, hardcore cop. And it's like
you almost get the sense that that these are they're racial profiling. But when you see like when they empty out their pockets all the pills and drugs these guys have, it's like, no, it's not. It's just like this crew, are pushing drugs, and they're on the narcotics team, so that they probably deal with these guys all the time. Now does you take a little bit of liberties and slapping around and calling them names? Yeah, there's but back then it wasn't really frowned upon because he got results. You didn't, especially that guy in the very beginning. They chased him down. He's in a Santa Claus outfit. Gene Hackman.
That's the big thing. That's the waka in here.
Yeah, they're kicking the guy in the ribs when he's down. I'm thinking like, dude, that is like that. Now that is really bad because in real life, if you kick somebody in the ribs like that, you can cause them internal bleeding.
Yeah.
So that's a little Hollywood. I don't think cops really do that. And if they do that, it's like
there's no body cam footage back then, bro.
I don't know about that back then, but I'm thinking like with all the cameras today, if you try to do that, you are going in the clinker. It's you can't do that to somebody. But yeah, it's very I would say not very dark, but it gives you really sense that that his character, Gene Hackman's character, is such a huge prick. Like and then you find out like was as the feds get involved in this case because they think they're following this guy Boca, and they're thinking this big drug deal is gonna go on, and even his chief says like, dude, the last time you had a hunch a cop died, and that's funny because later on they come he's now only got 2 cops that died, but yeah. I won't lie. I was starting to fall asleep towards the end, and then it was just too slow for me. And then when I got, the chase, they're he's telling Frog number 1 on the subway train, and I thought that was kind of funny. He's like, the guy knows he's following him. It hits off. He's like, oh yeah, and then he gets back on, and he's like, see ya, waves to him.
Well, I tell you, your tastes run towards a little more action oriented that you want to see. Mine kind of actually go to the opposite because before Tom Cruise is running around in all his movies, specifically the Mission Impossible ones, you got Gene Hackman doing it here. And to your point, there's a lot of chases and following subjects and all that too. And I like that. That's very spy movie-ish. And I think that's great. There's no special gadgets or anything else there too. There's this brand new thing that was becoming mainstream on movies where it was, hey, give us some wiretaps so we can spy and listen on to somebody or whatever. And that was like cutting edge at the time, 50 years ago, the technology being able to do it. And so this could be argued that it is a slow, boring, procedural detective cop thing. And it's like, I don't mind it at all because I tell you what, I really like the chases in here. I think the stunt guy that was involved here was the same guy in Bullet and a bunch of other driving scenes because the chase scene in the car I think is great when he's underneath, but even the foot chases are great. And one of the reasons why is because with the car you have that first person perspective where you just see where the car's going and it's at that level of the hood, so the stuff coming in and out of frame it's really great to see it. Not a lot of quick cut crap. And then also on the foot chases, you get to see that sense of space where they're at, and then they go indoors and then they're looking around, and the way it's shot, a lot of it's at mid-level looking up, and you get that like sense of density and being really in a crowded spot and everything too, and you're not quite sure if the person can see you the way it's filmed. So I give the director William Friedkin a lot of credit because obviously everybody knows him from the movie that would come out a year or two after this, The Exorcist, which is still one of the great horror movies of all time, or scare films. But yeah, overall, in terms of our taste, I know it's a little bit different, but this has been widely considered one of the best movies of all time, not just a cop movie or Gene Hackman's best or whatever too. And I think a lot of it has to do with how well it documented what was going on in the early 70s and that intensity and that grit, because Gene Hackman's delivering here. He's not laughing. He's not smiling. You're right. He's a prick. And anything that anybody growing up my age as a teenager in the 80s might have gotten used to, like whether it's Hoosiers or anything else, it's a little more lighthearted and stuff. But that's just how friggin' good Gene Hackman is, because it doesn't feel like he's acting, does it?
No, and it as I said, this came out of a very like In the Heat of the Night, which I'm not a fan of that show. That's it got really serious, and I was like, man, the drama part. In fact, I just got the point where this is becoming too much. Like I might as well just be watching like live PD,
Mm-hmm. This is cops before cops.
Yeah. So, so when I got to the car chase, I'm like, oh, so now they're gonna do Bullet. No, so instead of chasing in the car, he's chasing a train, and that's where it really picked up for me because I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good. No wonder my dad liked this part movie. I'm like, what does he see in this? Like, guy, because Popeye is a prick in this, and like there is a couple funny scenes, but not much. So I was really glad to see that they actually put some other than just him just like I'm just gonna tail him. Okay, now I'm gonna follow him. No, they actually did the car scene, and then what started out before you got the car chase is the sniper. That lady got blown away.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's like it just everything. As I said, this is all none of this is CG. Well, when he's in the car, obviously, like you don't see the CG, but he's really in the car.
Right.
He's being pulled by a trailer, but still, it's like, I love the fact that, well, I laughed because I was looking like, hey, that car got hit, and it's still driving. Whereas today's cars would just crash and it's stalled. When he hit that wall, man, he slammed because he tried to avoid hitting the baby carriage.
Mm-hmm.
So he slammed the brakes and slid around. But I was just loving like the whole car chase scene was great, and then like you said, like the guy, he's the French enforcer.
Yeah,
that's the one that killed the guy in the beginning. Now he's like at the end, and I love how nonchalant Gene Hackman's character is after like the whole chase and everything, and the guy's coming on the steps, and he's like, and the guy sees Gene Hackman, he's like leans over, he's like stop, and the guy's like runs away, and he's like screw it, shoot him back.
Well, yeah, and that's again, the militant part to it, because I'm not saying he shouldn't have shot the guy or whatever.
No,
but it's like, wow,
it was,
really?
Yeah, it was. I was like, damn, that's his character. It's believable for me. I was like, no wonder he's like, yeah, I'm done. I'm tired of running. Just shoot him in the back. We're done. Call it a day.
Well, and one thing I wanted to kind of bring up too is, we talk about it being Brady and Gutty and all that. One of the things about this film that I liked is, William Friedkin's earlier movies were documentaries, and so he knew how to kind of shoot in not a guerrilla kind of warfare style like that, but there is definitely a certain amount of license that people learned how to shoot, like if they were in Vietnam or World War II, how to shoot war footage and propaganda pieces and stuff too. So that is like almost a different take, because obviously you didn't have that going on until after World War II for the most part, with propaganda films for the war and pieces that they would show before a film would start back in the old days of movies. So again, a lot of the stuff being shot at kind of ground level, or to your point, in everyday, New York City here. We're not in, for the most part, we're not like in exclusive fancy places or whatever. You feel like you're actually walking on a street, like the scene where he goes around the corner. It's not a typical shot, and the lady's walking away from us in the scene, and she's pushing her baby in the cart, and the hitman just happens to miss Popeye, because Popeye stops for a second to let the girl go around. He's kind of being polite in that way, and steps around, so he inadvertently gets this lady shot. But one thing I wanted to mention too about the realism that I liked was, you mentioned a lot in the Dirty Harry early ones about how we talked about some of the guns and the bullets and stuff too, whether that's practical or real or not. But we talked a little bit about how the blood back then was bright red, like it would be if it would hit somebody, because
I noticed that. Yeah,
you had that in here. However, the gunplay, the guns, very few movies have guns that even sound remotely realistic to me. I can think the last one I can think of that would be even close to being accurate would be Tom Cruise.
They're firing
shooting, yeah. Because Michael Mann make sure the guns sound real and powerful and deadly, not just a toy. And here, it was like, it wasn't pow pow pow. It was boom boom boom, and I was really impressed by like how strong the guns were in here. I mean, I'm making a minor detail here about it, but guns just seem like an afterthought in TV shows and all that too. But back then in the 70s, to capture that and to be authentic, I think that added a lot of grit to it.
Yeah, it did. Like I said, this movie was different than I expected to be, because I've heard people say like, oh, it's a great movie, and I always put it off because I'm like, I never saw Gene Hackman having star power by himself, and then I looked in like, okay, Roy Schneider's in there. It's like, you know what, I'll give it a chance, because it's an older movie, and a lot of the older movies, they may not look fancy in the cover, but some of them are like hidden gems. And like I said, I'm glad that I watched the movie. I wasn't really disappointed at all. Like I said, the car chase was probably my favorite part because it's the fast pace, the action, him actually going through traffic. I know what I reminded you of? Grand Theft Auto.
No.
Grand Theft Auto, man. When you're playing the game, you're driving down and there's idiots in the way, and you're just like, he's honking the horn the whole time. Get out of the way.
Well, I tell you, Gene Hackman, like I say, he's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of Gene Hackman I haven't seen, but there's a lot that I have. And like I say, with him turning, I think 92 recently in the past few days, Ed mentions here in chat about doing something on him. He was one of the guys we immediately have talked about backstage about, we got to do some Gene Hackman. He's so good. He's so this and that. But in terms of like film, I'm like, well, Hoosiers isn't exactly extreme. French Connection's an obvious one because most people consider it one of the greatest movies of all time, or crime thrillers, or one of the best Gene Hackman ones. It won a crap ton of awards that year and everything, deservedly so, in my opinion. And to me, when I look at Gene Hackman, and there's just so much, it's a gem to watch him. He's not ugly by any means, but he doesn't have that movie star golden boy, sparkle on the teeth kind of Tom Cruise face. But that's what makes it great. He's like Joe Everyman playing his role, and he's just got an intense personality with him. And you can feel like you're him.
Is him being a face character. I've only ever known him from Superman, and I think he was another movie too where he was kind of a dick as well. Was it a football movie?
He was a coach in the 80s in Hoosiers.
Hoosiers, that's the one I'm thinking of.
And he wasn't really a dick in there, in my opinion.
No.
I grew up a big Indiana Hoosiers fan with Bobby Knight and all that, because Bobby Knight was the head coach of, America boycotted the 1980 Olympics, I believe. So in 1984, when Michael Jordan was going to the Olympics, Bobby Knight was his coach, and I had been following Bobby Knight ever since the early 80s, and he's one of the best college coaches of all time, and he's obviously retired. But Gene Hackman, the whole culture of Indiana with basketball and all that, it's not as relatable to, I think, a younger audience for just how big it was for about 40-50 years there, and in part because of him, and also because people loved Hoosiers. They're like, yeah, this is really what it's like, and Gene Hackman did a great job capturing that. And it was just one of those culture kind of things, either it was for you or not, and people would not like Hoosiers at all today. But yeah, he can do anything. That's the beautiful thing about him. He can do comedy. He can be a dick. He can be whatever, but he is just that damn good.
Yeah, he's in the. That's what I'm thinking of the other movie. I'm thinking of the Quick and the Dead. That's what I'm thinking of. That one where he's the villain. I love it when he's the villain, and especially I from the few movies I've seen him in, I still love him as Lex Luthor, the Superman movies.
And with Lex Luthor, I will say this,
because he has that charisma.
He does. And he's believable, but here's the thing. You guys have told me before with some of the new Superman remakes or whatever, I've tried putting them on a little bit, and I forget, I don't even know the actor's name, I forget what it is, that plays Lex Luthor, and I go, are you fucking kidding me? I go from Gene Hackman to this guy.
Kevin Spacey, that was Superman Returns.
No, not Kevin Spacey even, because Kevin Spacey can act a little bit. I'm talking
talking about the show on
the show, movies.
On the movies, there only is one, but there's only been one of Lex Luthor, and that's been Kevin Spacey.
I don't believe that's true.
No, the CW had the guy from 2.5 Men. That was the CW on Supergirl.
I saw this one dude that's played a lot of like juvenile.
No, and you're right. You're right. That was the other one. The Batman person, the guy from Zombieland.
Yes, him.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot. See, I forget about that movie because I hate those movies.
Exactly.
They're so bad.
The
Batman vs Superman. But like you said, when I go back to the Christopher Reeve movie, as far as Superman, I saw Gene Hackman just stands out more than Christopher Reeve to me. In that very first film, he especially if you read the comic books, he nails that role and then brings it to new levels of just like, oh my, it's just great. Especially I imagine how authors feel when they write a book and then somebody does that character too perfectly, and they just inspire them. Hey, this guy had a little more creativity to this. Now, I love that. I'm gonna put that in my next book. Gene Hackman can does that with his roles. He is believable, and I think he improves on them.
Yeah, and he has, when you get older, obviously sometimes, life happens to you, physically speaking, mentally, and all that too. And some of it we can control and some of it we can't. So unfortunately, someone like a Charlton Heston that we had talked about recently reviewing his very first film, Dark City,
Yeah.
we mentioned how he pretty much kind of kept out of the public eye from about the mid to late 90s. And that was because, he was starting to get a slight case of dementia or Alzheimer's specifically, which Michael Moore did a hit piece on. That's pretty much the last time you ever saw Heston until he passed away. And I look at someone like Gene Hackman, who was so prolific, and that's another way to describe him is with it, how all the amount of work that he's done. In the 90s, you think about it, that's what, 30 years ago. So he'd be in his early 60s. The guy mentally always seemed very intense, very sharp. It never seemed like he lost a step. And he hasn't been doing much for the past 20 years, which would be his early 70s.
2009. He gave an interview last year saying he does. He didn't quit because he is sick. He quit because, you know what? I just want to, keep working on keeping myself healthy.
Yeah.
Doing all this production stuff. I'm getting older in age. And he was, I think he was he had been in his 70s, mid 70s, and he just said, he's like, I just don't. I want to focus on everything else. My life is like getting closer to that, that part where
Yeah.
I could go anytime, especially when you get like 20, not the saying that, that he, you'll die the next day or whatever, but I loved how he said, he just said, he's like, I want to focus on my life. I've always focused on acting and doing, running around to other people's beck and call for 3 months, shooting in like the most horrible places.
Yeah.
I was like, I just wanted to relax, enjoy what I worked for. This is my retirement. I worked my butt off. I have a nice cushy pad to rely on. I'll just focus on all that stuff that's important, family and all that stuff. Myself, which I respect that because there's a lot of people who will work themselves to the point where they die, and he doesn't want to do that. He earned his place. He's
Well,
not
and
like
that's the thing too, is that, you know, some people obviously aren't very good with their money, or
nope.
they have a personality trait that doesn't allow them to, put themselves in a position where they don't have to work and everything too. I'm looking at you, Nick Cage.
Yep.
But with Gene Hackman, I don't really know too much about his personal life. I would just sit there and say that it's nice to see somebody older that's still very sharp mentally, and despite what's going on with you physically and mentally, you still can be very good. Obviously, William Shatner comes to mind, being I think about 90 years old too, and let's not forget Anthony Hopkins, who's got to be in his 80s now too, and
Yep.
he's obviously slowed down a little bit, but he can still deliver his lines and do well too. And
Yeah.
even though unfortunately I attempted to watch a few seasons of Westworld based off of how much I really like the early movies, which I don't care for the TV show. I think Anthony Hopkins is very strong in it, and I
It
just
looks
wish there
like
was a little bit more of them.
it
So some of
looks like
these guys, just with their age, they're still so good. It's just trying to find the right parts for them where they can be on there rather than just a simple cameo and call it a film. It's tough. You don't get a lot of people, men or women, that in
yeah.
their later parts of their life had an opportunity to do that.
It looks like he has 3 kids. He's divorced once, and he's been married to his other wife, current wife, since 1991. But I'm looking at IMDb, some of the trivia about him. Apparently, he was the first choice to play Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch. That's crazy if that's true. He served in the Marines. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. He lied. He lied at his age. He joined Marines at 16 years old.
A lot of
That's
it
crazy.
wasn't uncommon for when you were younger to either not have your age accurately recorded, especially if you're an immigrant, or you just wanted to get out and go serve. There was a lot of people that at a young age would lie about it to go into military service because they wanted to do it. It's the mentality is not really the same today, but you'll notice that some of the older actors we've talked about served. They had a 2 to 4 year stint in whatever service and everything too. And a lot of them will mention how that experience helped translate them to being successful in acting, not just because if you're Charlton Heston and you're part of the old studio regime where they would loan you out, but they would groom you, they would train you, they would do all that. Things changed. So even someone like Hackman, who's older, who didn't necessarily grow up in the studio system, having that discipline of being in the armed services and coming out for it, those kind of actors seem to have a bit more professionalism about them. And I'm not saying they're perfect angels, don't get me wrong, but you can definitely tell as we start talking about actors more and more and more in their catalog, we go, wow, this is a cool movie, but do we really care about the actors?
Yep.
Gene Hackman was one of those few guys, like to me, like a Charlton Heston, you go, I don't care what the movie is, but because he's in it, I'm
Hmm.
gonna go see it. And Gene Hackman, I think's earned that.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt about Clint Eastwood. You know, he's proven over and over again that he can act, and that's just one type of role.
Hmm.
Apparently, more stuff in here. Was offered a chance to play Hannibal Lecter in the Silence of the Lambs movie, turned it
Yeah.
down. He also turned down he was offered to direct it, turned it down. Back in 1946, when he was a teenager, he was apparently arrested for stealing candy and soda from a store.
Now that's all decriminalized.
He said, and for those who don't remember what Inside the Actor Studio was, it was a show back then. And this guy with this really long beard and bald, and he would just interview people and just harass them. No,
He would
that's
never harass anybody.
I'm
Are you
just kidding.
kidding me? The guy was.
Did you ever watch SNL? Well,
We're not talking what Will Ferrell
I know.
did. I mean,
Yeah,
bad
but
benefit.
back apparently Gene Hackman said and when he was on there at the taping, he said the two important factors when he decides on what films he's going to work on is what the script is and how much the budget they have for that script. Because he doesn't want to get involved in something it's that's too cheap, I guess. But apparently he's also involved in a road rage incident back in 2001. He hit somebody's car in Hollywood, and the two young men out there, attacked him. What the heck? Hope he slugged them. Hope Popeye beat him down. Allegedly. It says he was also in 3 of the Josh Grisham movies. The Firm, The Runaway Jury. I forgot.
John Grisham was big in the 90s.
Yeah. So he's I'm just looking. There's so much stuff. He turned on the role of Randall Patrick Murphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine how much different these movies would be with Gene Hackman?
Yeah, and we've talked about bringing that up, but that's just far away at this point here. But with Gene Hackman, somebody that, like Ed's saying in chat here about doing a retrospective, he's obviously an immediate one where it'd be like, if it happened on a Friday, hey, we got to try to cover Gene Hackman tonight because it's Gene Hackman. And he's one of the few actors, like I said before, that I go, oh, Gene Hackman's in it. It can't be that bad because even if the script sucks, directing or whatever it is, you want to watch Gene Hackman. And very few actors even today, I think, command that ability. And I think I mentioned Tom Cruise. Yes, there's definitely a Tom Cruise thing to every one of his movies, but it generally delivers for the most part. And so he's worth watching. And I'm curious to see what's going to happen to him later on in his career because Tom Cruise is approaching 60 himself. So will he still keep doing some of his things? No, I think he's got to find something else.
It's going to be weird, though. You think about it. All these actors are up in age. I forgot that Gene Hackman was even in his 90s. I didn't realize it. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been 20 years. Yeah. I didn't realize. I was like, dude, I just saw him in Runaway Jury was like in a long time ago. It's like the early 2000s. So it's all these big actors from the 80s and 70s. Like, once they're gone, Hollywood's gonna drop. I don't think there's anyone really younger actors out there that I recognize that they say, hey, you know what? He's in a movie. I want to go watch it. No, it's getting to the point where I just don't care to go watch movies anymore. And I can't think of an actor right now, a younger actor that I like. Hey, I want to go see him. He's a really good actor.
It's tough. And, Harrison Ford was somebody that was really popular, obviously, for quite some time. And he was somebody up until probably the early 2000s, late 90s, that's like, no. And then we've talked about the Bruce Willis effect where it's like, okay, he's like the low-key Nick Cage as far as approach. It's just everyone likes the idea of Nick Cage being goofy and silly and all that when Nick Cage can act and has done some great stuff. So you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to do that. I think one of the last guys to me, but he's pretty much retired and he's in his 70s, would be Kurt Russell. He did 2 Christmas movies where he played Santa Claus in it. I don't know if it was for Netflix, let's say, but it was for a streaming service. Goldie Hawn was in it, and they're really nice kids movies. And I could see how a young child today, if they were watching, might think it's okay, and they were wholesome and they were good, and that's what he wanted to do. But I don't know that we'll see him really much, other than a cameo in Fast and Furious 47. When that comes out, I mean, it's really tough. So you're absolutely right. There's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years, probably several main actors have been around that it's going to crush me. It's going to hurt you.
Yeah,
Young
it's
20 something will be
you think
will be
about it.
like, oh, is he a big deal? And the
A
answer is
lot,
yeah.
a lot of these actors when we're watching them in their prime time. Like they don't get famous till they're like in their 40s.
That's right.
So it's you think about that, and like so. I'm thinking like who's the top star right now? Like, Robert Pattinson, I guess, is a big name, and Dylan O'Brien from
I don't even know who that is.
Assassins, whatever it's called, American Assassin. Opposite, he was the one that was being trained to be assassin by Michael Keaton.
Oh, okay.
That kid. He was popular off a Teen Wolf MTV show, and he did just in a movie, Love and Monsters. He's done some other ones, The Maze Runner. He's a big name, not really a big name, but I'm saying like that's the only two I can think of that are younger people that are like kind of popular. It's like they're like the other ones, like you think about it, like okay, Michael B. Jordan. Okay, what has he been in? I really don't know. I hear people want him to be Superman, but other than that, I maybe it's me. I don't go look around and watch a lot of movies, so maybe he's been in some stuff. Yeah. But like, I'm not, yeah. Who in the blue hell is Dylan O'Brien? And that's another thing. Look at when he says who in the blue hell, that's The Rock. I know The Rock, but like The Rock is like not gonna be the carry every movie, there is. He's he's getting up there in age too, and he only does certain type of roles.
Rock's gonna have a massive heart attack, I think, one of these days with all the drugs he's on, and more power to him for taking him and busting his ass when he does. Hard, but I could see it happen.
It'll be electrifying.
So, if The Rock were to die pretty soon, what would you think about that?
Oh,
it doesn't matter.
He laid the smackdown on himself.
He's laid a lot of smack in his veins. Let's finish up here with Gene Hackman and the French Connection. I mean, it all comes full circle because, again, this movie, French Connection, came out 51 years ago. Gene Hackman obviously was in his early 40s at the time. You can see it on there. So he was definitely a veteran by that time of being in films. And to go, wow, in the early 70s, this guy's a veteran. He's still around today. Yeah, he's going to be sorely missed. Very entertaining. He's just got that intangible it factor that is not necessarily, oh my gosh, a stunning beauty, or somebody like Angelina Jolie that's extremely beautiful but kind of got a weird face, if you know what I'm saying. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not knocking on her, but you can be handsome but not look good on TV and vice versa. That's just how it is. And I think Gene Hackman, with that everyday man look about him, and just the ease at which he delivers his lines and timing, you don't ever feel like he's acting or waiting to hit his cue or anything else that bad acting translates to. He just seems like such a natural, and that's a rarity. And I think it really is on display, even though he may be a prick and we don't maybe have the fondest feelings for a militant detective, Popeye Doyle, in this film, but it just is really entertaining watch, and he sucks you in despite any negatives surrounding him. He's just that talented and that good of an actor. So a little bit different than what we would think of as a mainstream actor being young and beautiful and handsome and in social media. Screw that. That's not Hackman, but Hackman is so entertaining. You got to see The French Connection if you like films at all. It's a must-see in one of him's. I know we decided on this one because I don't think you had seen it, and I was leaning more towards a conversation. I'm sure we'll get to that here at some point pretty soon. But yeah, we're definitely trying to do some of the elder actors right now before diving into some other stuff too.
Also, I gotta say the babe of this movie, Arlene Farber. She's a B-list actress. Did a lot of the exploitation movies back in the 60s, 70s. She's not alive anymore, but she died when she was like 70s. But she plays Baco's wife in here. And Roy Schneider, he's like, "Hey, how much will it cost you to try on some lingerie for me?" He's like, he's like $50. She's like, "No, $200." Like $200. I love how he's just talking smack to her, like while her husband goes in the back room, doesn't even notice
Well, he's working her.
Yeah, I know,
He's trying to
and
make
she,
her a mark, and she doesn't know it.
I
Even though
love,
she's a con artist, being a part of that
yeah,
criminal
yeah.
element, he is too. So it's kind of it's a quick scene. You're right, because he's really in there trying to keep tabs on her husband. But the fact that he's kind of being a little whatever, and she's liking the game too. I'm like, Roy Schreider, you're the man. It's too bad Jaws is the first movie I saw you in, because I like this Roy Schreider here too.
Yeah, it's different to see him much younger than when I saw him in Jaws. So it's like seeing him in this is like, wow, he's a little more smooth talking in this. He's a little young. He's like, it's kind of cool seeing him in something other
I
than
had wrote a
Jaws.
lengthy expose called Roy Schreider is a dick, and I went through all the reasons and why I liked it, because the nice guy, Chief Brody, we see, hey, he's fine, he's great. Everybody loves Jaws, right? But this is the Roy Schreider that stands out, and we don't really say a lot about him, but Roy Schreider was obviously very active in the 70s as well, and we'll talk more about Roy Schreider too later, because he's a good actor as well, and that's one of the reasons why we go back and examine some of these older films in addition to newer ones, or our favorite, the 80s. But Gene Hackman, wow, what an actor. The last thing I'll say for my final thoughts here is, again, you have to see The French Connection if you profess to be any sort of cinephile, movie buff, whatever you want to call it, no matter what your age is, your sex, your gender, whatever you decide to that day, any of that stuff to be. French Connection really is a great film. It may not be personally for me as likable as, like, say, Rocky, which is up there with one of my favorite movies of all time. But the French Connection, if you're into crime thrillers, which is light on the
Mhm.
action and more on the chase and detectiving and the whole execution of that, this movie's great. And you know what? I won't even go into the details about the ending. I will simply say that one reason why I think a lot of people like this movie was the ending was a bit cynical. And that's it. And you know what? It
Yeah,
fits for the movie.
I'll just say two more things about this movie. Apparently, the guy who wrote this, or the director and stuff, Friedkin did not want, uh, you know, um, Gene Hackman. He wanted Paul Newman, but he was out of the budget range. So they're like, we went for Jackie Gleason and Peter Boyle,
Hmm.
and Jimmy Breslin, who's a New York comic who never acted before. But they were busy with other stuff, and then he's like, let's get Steve McQueen. But then Steve McQueen said, I don't want to do another cop movie. I did Bullet. I don't need to do any more. I'm done. And like they also went for Charles Johnson, Lee Marvin, James Caan, Robert Mitchum. And all of them turned it down. So finally, they went with Gene Hackman at the end of this and all. And this is the last fact. This film was airless to show the World Trade Center.
Yep.
They had just completed the North Tower,
Yep.
partially completed the South Tower. In the background scene, following when they first arrived in New York, the frogs.
Hmm.
So you can see that there. I think that's a cool little trivia thing there.
Well, because everything you would see that involved New York, you could orient yourself just by looking at the places of the two towers. Maps weren't necessarily as widely available as they are now, like on Google Maps or Bing or anything. So you can't, back then you would just know, oh, if it's this shot here, Wall Street's going to be to this side, and Madison Avenue's over here. Here's Broadway and Central Park. You're like, oh, that's cool. And I think that added a lot to the allure of New York City, even though it was a crap hole going into the 80s and 90s, really. And here's the thing, which I'll agree with you at. I do believe his character is a bit militant, a bit of a prick, but I think it fits for the role. It fits in with the background, everything else there too. I'm looking at Robert Mitchum being half
70s
drunk,
New
half
York.
high, going.
Yeah.
I'm sure Robert Mitchum would do a great job. We love Robert Mitchum, but the Popeye Doyle that we see in here seems like that's the role that matches it.
Paul Newman did a cop movie. Is a detective movie. I forget what it's called. But he's a very laid back character in the movie. I forget. It kills me that I watched it like a while ago, and it just kills me that I don't know what the name of the movie is. But Harper, that's what it was. Harper.
Oh yeah,
he did that. So seeing him in that, I wouldn't really want him in this role. And it's a different thing. It's just Hackman sold it.
Yeah.
So my other question is this: after this, do you want to watch The French Connection 2?
I will say this about The French Connection 2. At some point, I'm sure that we'll probably cover it. I think it would be better if we dove into like The Conversation or some other Hackman films, and just in terms of prioritizing his catalog. I will say that The French Connection 2, obviously it's a sequel, and it's got one scene in it that's extremely famous, which I won't say what it is because I know you haven't seen it. So when we go to review that at some point in the future, and you watch it cold, you'll see The scene that I'm thinking about that I'm not wanting to disclose right now publicly, those that have seen it know the scene that I'm talking about. It makes you appreciate Hackman even more as an actor, because here you're going, oh, it's just Popeye Doyle. He doesn't have a big range, right? There's nothing, too up or too down about him. He is what he is all the way through the movie, right? But in the French Connection 2, there's definitely a major scene in here that Hackman brings in. You're like, holy crap, he's really nailing it. I'll just simply say it reminds me of one of the great movies over the past few years with Nick Cage, Mandy, in it, where Nick's suffering and some grief. Hackman is suffering some grief of his own in the second film. So it's not a bad sequel, but it's a
Okay.
sequel. You know what I'm saying? So
I just thought maybe we get some more Doyle in our lives.
yeah, well, thankfully there's not a lot, because I think it's diminishing returns with the character, unlike Dirty Harry, which just can be an anthology like American Horror
It's
Story or
directed though
something.
by John Frankenheimer, not William Friedkin. So I'm interested. It might be how different it is from this movie.
There's more time spent in Europe. That's why. Yeah.
With the frogs.
Maybe. And we know nothing says frogs like French frogs, right? They make
Yes.
those damn frog legs. Yeah, I forget what the French call them. I call them disgusting, but tastes like chicken down here in the South. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. French Connection, 1971, with Gene Hackman, Roy Schreider. Great film. Definitely worth a watch. Check it out. If you haven't seen it in a long time, check it out again. It will suck you in a little bit, especially when Hackman's on screen too. Look forward to more Gene Hackman goodness and others too here on the Xtreme Movie Show. For the real Dr. V and for everybody involved here at the Xtreme Movie Show, thanks for listening. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.
Later.